Sorry, so I'll stand back a bit and say, "Hail, bright Cecilia." That's how Henry Purcell starts his ode to Saint Cecilia. And Saint Cecilia is the patron saint, or the patroness of music and musicians, and she is always depicted in art as playing an organ, and so she should. After all, it is the king of instruments, and one of the great instruments today. But in the same ode to Saint Cecilia, the organ is referred to as a wondrous machine. And so it is. It's wondrous, and it is also a machine. You'll see what I mean as I go on during the talk tonight about that thing. It's a complex web of features, mechanical and otherwise. It is like a great machine. And it is unlike other instruments because it has so many different tones. You know, the flute has one shape and it has one sound, I think anyway. James Galway's golden flute, for example, still sounds like a flute, even though he calls it a golden flute. He makes it sound very nice, but it's still a flute, okay? And a violin, I remember John Carger saying once, a violin is a violin is a violin. It doesn't matter what you do with it, it still sounds like a violin. I hope there aren't any violinists out there, goodness me. But with the organ, you're never quite sure what you're going to get, because everyone is different. I never use the word unique, but tonight I'm going to say that organs are unique in that I have never seen two organs that look the same or were in any way the same. The size, they may be as small as a wardrobe, and I'll show you some tonight, or else it fills a whole room, you know, a whole chamber is required in order to hold it. It may have a number of manuals. It can go from, these are the keyboards, 1 manual, 2 manuals, 3 manuals, 4 manuals, 5 manuals, and of course in America they have 7 manuals, but we'll ignore that as being ridiculous. And it may have pedals that you play with your feet, or it may not have pedals, or it may have treadles, or you know, that you pump the air in, or it may not. And all these stops that you can get, and this can be anything from about 4 or 5 on some organs, and you can go up to 82 in the case of Westminster Abbey, or the last count 102 on Liverpool Cathedral, which means that what they are called speaking stops because they are attached to pipes, and if you pull them out you'll get a noise out of it. There are other stops as well that don't make noises because they merely connect things up. And the whole configuration of the organ is always different wherever you go. So when an organist goes to play an organ somewhere, the first thing he or she's got to do is try and sort out where everything is and how it all works before they can get going. So it's very difficult then to choose what you could call a representative model of an organ. There are lots of similarities, but there are lots of differences as well. Okay. And one of the other things, which doesn't apply to all other musical instruments, is that they are changed. And we'll talk about that tonight. They can be enlarged and extended and upgraded and done all sorts of things to. You don't do that to violins or flutes. You got it and that's it, finish. Right? You don't do any more to it. But first of all, I want to look at the players in this particular game of organ history, and that is OTA. OTA, the Organ Historical Trust of Australia. OTA is the Organ Historic Trust of Australia, and the aims of OTA are to preserve historic pipe organs and organ building records. And the second one is to stimulate public interest in pipe organs which are of national or local importance, and I'll come to that in a little while. It's still a bit out of focus, isn't it? And the third one is to encourage scholarly research into the history of the organ, its musical use and organ music. Okay, and then we find out with this little asterisk that actually pipe organs of national or local importance by reason of educational, historic, artistic, I'm just taking here, traditional, scientific, antiquarian or other special interest, in other words, anything at all, attaching to them are now called notable pipe organs. The reason here, I think, is because if you say historic, you cut out a heck of a lot of other stuff as well. Historic is part of it, and not just the whole story. So we have notable pipe organs. I'll just leave those up there for a few minutes while I go on there. the official objectives of the Organ Historic Trust number 35, so I didn't think I'd go through that, I'll just give you the three précis there, but there is a considerable amount still that the Trust does. Now I want to look at the criteria for assessing pipe organs. In other words, what is it that makes an organ historic, is what or in this case, notable. What is the important thing about it? Criteria for notable pipe organs. The first one comes from the Heritage Council of New South Wales with the assistance of the Pipe Organ Advisory Committee. They came up with this set of criteria: the quality and design of the workmanship, the artistic merit, the degree of originality, the ornithological significance, and the environmental and cultural significance. I found that a little bit vague to work with, so I came to the local South Australian one where we have a pipe organ group which is concerned about the conservation of pipe organs, and their criteria were age, closeness to the original state, rarity, casework, the state of repair, the historical association, and the relationship to the architectural setting. So I looked at all these things and said, well, tonight I'm going to ignore those two, and I'm going to look, first of all, because it's convenient, I will look first at the builders, and we'll take it on from there. Then I will bring in other things as we go on, which to me seemed to make it much more easier to put over to you people. At this stage, I would like to thank David Shield of the Organ Historic Trust, because David has loaned me a great deal of photographs and whatever else, and also he gave me quite a lot of information. And so has Leith Jacob, who is an organ builder. I'll show you more of that later. And I got quite a bit out of Bruce Naylor's Gazetteer, even though it may be a bit out of date now. Bruce would be the first one to agree to that. So I have to say thanks to those people for some of the information here. But I have to give a disclaimer at this point and say that the views expressed are not necessarily those of OTA. OTA would be very pleased to hear that, I think. But first of all, we'll start off with the understanding of the builders themselves. Up to 1880 in South Australia, most organs were imported, at least all the major ones were imported. A number of small instruments were made. Overseas organ builders are just as equally venerated in South Australia as the local builders are. So we're not looking just at the locals, we're looking at the overseas people as well. A number of major organs were imported last century. For example, Bishop and Son of London, they put in a number. There's St Michael's Mitcham of 1878. There's the St Peter's Cathedral first organ, which went in 1877. That's now at St Augustine's Unley. And that was Hill, Norman and Beard. Sorry, when it went to St Augustine's, it was Hill, Norman and Beard. There's another one called the Hill and Son, London, the Adelaide Town Hall organ of 1876, and I'll talk more about that in a little while. Now it is a brand new organ. J. Eagles of London was considered to have built the first major one that came to South Australia, and that was Perry Street Methodist Church in 1855. It's quite a notable organ, that one. Unfortunately, at the moment, it has been enlarged and installed in the Pilgrim Church along with some other parts, and it has been enlarged and enlarged and enlarged, so I think the original organ's just about disappeared, which is a great pity, I think. There are also interstate organ builders, Hill, Norman and Beard, who did the St Peter's Cathedral in 1929, and there's also Finchams, and I'll talk of Finchams in a moment. And of local organ builders, we have people like Samuel Marshall. He built some early ones. In fact, it's considered one of the first actually built in South Australia of 1848, which went to St John's, Halifax Street. That one's gone now, and they have another one there. There's Johann Wolff. He made 22 organs between 1863 and 1892. One of his finest was in St Luke's Whitmore Square, and we all know what happened to that. It got burnt when the church was burnt to the ground. We lost that organ. That was in 1868. And there was a second organ in 1879. But that's destroyed now. There's also a Wolf organ at Tin Street Baptist in 1876. That's been altered several times. And St John's, Halifax Street of 1875, but that's been changed as well and also altered. It's now a Dodd organ. Okay. In the Barossa Valley, as you would expect, there was a very strong Lutheran tradition. They imported organs first, and then there were local builders as well. But they both, whether imported or whether they were local, they continued what we could call the continental tradition or the style of organ, which is different to the English style of organ. Daniel Heinrich Lemke built, he claimed at one stage he built 13, but we think he only built 4, but it doesn't matter, they're nice organs anyway. They are quite small, indeed. They are foot-blowing, they're about the size of a wardrobe, so this is the small type organ, and he used both wood and metal pipes, and I can now put on a picture and show you the one. This is the one at Point Pass, and unfortunately I don't have a recording of this one, but I can play you 2 other little organs that Lemke built. The first one is in St John's, Lutheran in 1875. Let's see what it sounds like. Cross your fingers, I haven't tried this. Here we go. It's all right. Stopping there. Another Lemke organ, and this one is in Grunberg. That particular one, incidentally, you pedal it to get the wind, but in this particular case they have included an electric blower. In that particular recording they actually did it with the foot pedals again. John Stiller playing. In this one, which is a similar sort of organ, that sort of simple casework, they have put an electric blower, and this is it with an electric blower. But I want to play this particular one. This one is using wood and metal pipes. And it is repeated only on the wooden pipes to correct some the way in which they were first built. Another one of the time is Johann Karl August Kruger, who built 2 organs in South Australia, and then he went to Victoria, which is a pity, but only one survives, and this is in St Thomas Lutheran Church in Stockwell. He too used metal and wooden pipes, but in this case he made the wooden pipes himself, and there is a possibility that they are the first first metal pipes made in South Australia. We'll just have a little quick listen to that one as well. I'm not playing all of these tapes, you're only getting bits and pieces on each. Another nice one. Alright, the time we shall move on. Thank you. Finchams, that I mentioned before, Finchams of Melbourne, they set up a branch in Adelaide in 1881, and Arthur Hobday was the manager, and there are organs today still existing of Fincham and Hobday. Christchurch Kapunda, for example, 1887, is a small organ, but a very nice one indeed, and at Glenelg, St Peter's Anglican Church of 1888 is a Fincham and Hobday. And in 1888, Josiah Eustace Dodd, or J.E. Dodd, who was born in Melbourne and came to Adelaide in 1881, became the manager with Finchams in 1888. In 1894, he bought out Finchams and went on to become South Australia's #1 organ builder. In fact, I would put him easily in the top 3 of Australia. He had a very good mechanical and engineering ability, and you'll see that that is very necessary. He had extraordinary energy. He lived till he was 95 years old, so I guess he had to. And he had an avant-garde technical approach. He was always trying up something new. In fact, from the 1890s, there was a number of technical changes. For example, electricity came in the early 1900s. So electric blowers could now be installed instead of having to use choir boys or water to run it. You could use electric blowers. An electric key action, I'll say more about that one later. And Dodd tried all these things out. He also installed many accessories, all sorts of pistons and things for changing stops while you're playing. By 1908, he was considered by an English organist to be ahead of what they were building in England, which is quite remarkable, I think. He built about 82 organs in South Australia, well, not necessarily in South Australia, as well as constant tuning and repairing and rebuilding and enlarging and restoring and doing all these things that organ builders do, both in Australia, that is interstate as well as South Australia, and even in New Zealand. And he is acknowledged throughout Australia. In fact, we talk about Hill, Norman and Beard, and we talk Fincham, and we talk Dodd. And he died in 1952, and there are people today who still remember the good old Dodd. I'll play now a bit of Dodd organ from Tanunda, St John's Lutheran Church. And straight away you will see the difference between the Dodd organ and what we've just been listening to of the German ones. Bad luck, Dodd. I'm going to go on now to some of this criteria. The first one is, I think, sound or tonality. Neither of these other sets of criteria make it clear what I think is the most significant aspect of the organ, and that is the sound or the tone of the organ. It's hidden in the first lot in what is called artistic merit, and it's hidden in the second one done the closest to original state, and I'll talk about those things later. But I think the sound of the organ, surely it is a musical instrument, ought to be the most important thing. It should be judged on its sound. It can represent a school of thought or a philosophy of organ building or a tradition of organ building. Various countries have specific traditions of organ building which clearly marks one organ from another. In other words, you can tell an English organ, particularly of the late 19th century, by the sound it makes. There are references to the so-called continental organ, which is a bit broad, because if you hear a German organ and a French organ and a Spanish and an Italian, they all sound quite different. They all sound German or French or Italian or Spanish. They are quite specific organs. We speak of the Baroque style organ, and hence the neo-Baroque, which was popular during this century. The English 19th century, 20th century organ has been referred to as romantic. Dodd followed this particular approach. He was the English romantic type, producing organs with a number of tone colours rather than a broad chorus of sound. So he'd be putting in stops which would sound like, for example, oboes and clarinets and this type of thing. He would go for lots of tone colour rather than getting a chorus of sound like the Baroque organs would. Right, I'll listen to another one now. We'll listen for a moment to Kruger again, which is the Australian-made German tradition, and then we'll listen to a bit of Dodd in the English tradition. Get them side by side so that you actually hear them. And one could go on with this all night, but I'm not going to do that. It's the last time we have music, so listen carefully. First, a bit of Kruger. Brilliant sound. Stuck with this one. I've got to wait for it because then I'll pick up Dodd next. So I can't push it. remember once going and hearing a new organ being played, and then afterwards people came and tried it out as well, and James Govenlock from St Francis Xavier's Cathedral came and he played it and said, suet pudding. That's just what he thought it sounded like. However, we won't go any more there. The point of all this is that tonal structure of the organ is very important. It is conceived by the organ builder as a single mind creation, and therefore can be considered, this is the tonal structure, can be considered a work of art. The argument is that you don't change that concept any more than you would add or alter an older painting to bring it up to date or to satisfy political correctness. This is the way the organ builder saw it, and that's how it should stay. It's like changing the words of Shakespeare because we don't understand it anymore, make it easy for people to understand. Would we do that? We don't have to. I'll move on to the next one quickly, and that is the relationship to the building, which is of oral and visual significance, both of them. Dr. Albert Schweitzer, who better could I quote, said that the organ will never be the same until it's been put in its rightful place, and that is, which is in the centre of the building. Well, that's okay for Dr. Schweitzer to say that. It's okay for Exeter Cathedral. I mean, it is fantastic, isn't it? Could you beat that? But it's not really liturgically acceptable today, certainly not in South Australia, and we don't have any building that could actually do this. Not even St Peter's Cathedral or St Francis Xavier's could come up with an organ stuck in the middle of it. So for the next best acoustic effect, the organ should be on the main axis. Here is one on the main axis. I guess it's the only place they could put it anyway, because it is Munter Mines, and on both sides there is a gallery that goes across the back and right down both sides of the church. And this is right on the front. And again, this is strongly centred in the English Methodist tradition, which of course is what you would expect in Munter, just as the Barossa Valley organs are centred in the German Lutheran tradition. That's okay for the nonconformist church, but it's no good for the Catholic or the Anglican tradition, as the altar happens to be the main focal point. You can't have an organ in the road. So therefore, the Catholic Church has often put the organ in the west gallery, that is at the other end of the church, over the main doors when you first come in. And this is also on the axis, and that's a good thing. So the sound can go straight down the church. Our Lady of Victories, for example, at Glenelg and St Lawrence's, North Adelaide, which is a fine Dodd organ, and St Patrick's at Grote Street and Calvary Hospital Chapel, have all got their organs up the back, over the front door, up in the gallery. The Anglicans, for the old traditional liturgy, has the organ up front but on the side, because they had to have a choir, you see, up the front. Have the altar there, then you have the choir, so you have the organ on the side there. So what you get is this sort of thing, where it is up on the side. That is St Oswald's outside, that one. So the position matters. A good organ builder will build and voice the organ to suit the position in the building and the building's acoustic properties. This is where we're getting down to the real nitty-gritty here. Voicing. Now, you get two types of pipes. You get a flue pipes and you get the reed pipes. And they can be of metal or they can be of wood. Now, there's a bit of show and tell time here. So you get a metal pipe. They look like. This is the foot, and it has a mouth and ears on the side and so forth. It's rather like a recorder. It's got a little fickle thing here. When the end comes up, it strikes this and sets up vibrations, and the length will give you the pitch, and you tune it by sliding this thing up and down at the top here. And this one is called a Dulciana, I think, which is what we call a string tone, and gives you... We'll start singing now, thank you. That's the Dulciana, and one of about the same size. It's also metal, just the same sort of thing. You tune it by that thing up the end there, and that goes, which is quite a different sound entirely. Well, you say, what's going on there? That should happen like that. You get a little chap like this, which is a metal one. This is different again. This is called cone tuning at the top here. It just dips in at the top there, and they just knock this one way or the other, and so they tune it that way rather than sliding the thing up and down. This has virtually the same system, but it doesn't have any ears on the side, and that gives you a... Or you get a wooden one, It's about the same pitch. Beautiful. Lovely sound. But quite different to this one. And this one's different to that, and that's different to that one. Now, all these differences are done by a number of different ways. This is the voicing system. Oh, I forgot to mention the reed. Oh, blimey, can't miss the reed. This is quite a different system now. This has a little reed inside, and it's all sealed up, so you've got to tune it with this little wire thing at the top here, and the reed actually vibrates, and you get quite a different sound, like, oh, pardon me, like that. It is a high stop there, a high pipe. Okay, so with all this, the pipes have to be voiced. People think that the organ builder tunes, but tuning is part of the act, but really voicing is the real thing. And the voicer is an artist. When he has installed the pipes, what he has to do is to make sure, one, that the pipes speak correctly, and you're getting a good clear tone out of it, and that two, you get a particular quality of tone out of it. That's what makes the difference between the Dulciana and the Gedakt and all these other 82 pipes stops that you may have. And three, he has to modify the power and the quality of each pipe in the rank so that the whole rank sounds like one rank all sounding together. Otherwise you'd have things going off and it would sound ridiculous. So that's part of the act as well. So he has to balance each pipe within the rank of pipes. He also has to balance each stop in the organ with the whole organ so that the whole organ sounds properly. And then he has to balance the whole tonal quality of the organ to the building where it is sitting. Now this makes a difference whether the building, whether it's sitting in the side in a chamber like this. This is a bit unfortunate because the bottom manual, you see it has 3 manuals here to play on. The bottom one's a bit useless because all the pipes of the bottom manual happen to be right at the back. And by the time the sound has fought its way out through the organ, you can't hear it. So it's all a bit useless. So there's been a bit of a problem with the setting up of this one. And there's a lovely quote which says that the building is the ultimate finisher of the sound. It doesn't matter what you do then with the organ, it's going to be the building that finally decides what it will sound like. So if the organ builder is worth his salt, he will be making the pipes, he will be voicing the pipes to go in that particular building. I'm making a point of this because it all comes up later. And also it is a very, very difficult job. I mean, it's fairly easy to do all the necessary, it's a very fiddly business to have to move these and fix that and do things there, and there's a lot of work that has to be done in order to voice the thing properly. And when it gets to the upper pipes, these smaller ones, it is referred to as requiring surgeon skills to be able to do it. It is a very, very difficult business indeed. But on that alone, his organ will stand or fall down. It is said that Dodd was conscientious about the placement of the organs and the size of the chamber, and he was a good voicer for the position of the organ. I have doubts about that statement. I think that is in retrospect when we like to think nice things about the organ builder. However, the next one is the casework, which I put distinctly into the visual significance. Get rid of that because we're coming to another part of the art of the organ. Includes the overall design, joinery and the carving and whatever else, and particularly what is referred to as diaparing, which is the decoration that is actually painted on the pipes. Fortunately we don't see too much of this these days, and it's a wonderful thing when you do find a church organ that has been properly diapered, as it were. This one is Christchurch Kapunda. It was put in by Fincham and Hobday back then in 1887. It has very fine casework, as you can see bits of the casework there, and also very fine diaparing. Semaphore Methodist Uniting Church, and I'll refer to that a bit later too, but that has some very nice diaparing as well. That's only part of the organ, but there's 3 times of that going off to the right-hand side. And Munter Church, All Saints Anglican Church by J. Broad, very fine picture. One can ask, did the builder take into account the architectural style and the form of the building when he designed the organ? In some cases you can see that he did, in other cases it didn't matter, I think. This also includes the cabinet work of the console itself. In this case the console is there, it is part of the organ, but there are other places where the console is a separate thing. Now we come to the juicy bit. This is the one which looks at the originality, the pipe work, what we call the registration and the action. And this relates to the sound and the tonality section I spoke of a little while back. Tonal structure is important. It is conceived by the builder and is a work of art, which I've already mentioned. The organ is different from other instruments in that it changes, but whether it should change or not is the big question. I've been referring all the way through to rebuilt and restored and enlarged and those sorts of things. I mean, one does not change a violin, one doesn't change a flute, one doesn't even change a piano, but organs are changing all the time. And the big argument for this is that the organ is a living tradition, they say, living tradition. Successive generations contribute each in their own way. Organs play an important role in the worship of the congregation, and the liturgical needs and requirements are changing, and the forms of worship are changing, and therefore the organ should change too. And they still have their place today. Some people are saying, oh, we don't need organs anymore, but they do. They are just as strong now in the liturgy as they were 100 years ago. Organ music itself is changing. 20th century organ music cannot be played on some 19th century organs. One wonders if they should even try sometime. And an organ can become obsolete. It may be an exquisite period piece. And when it is so, it is also an expensive luxury. So you have this problem where the needs are changing, so there is a desire to change the organ. The alternative argument to all this is, if we don't keep some of these old organs, how will people ever know what they were really like if they're all changed? Westminster Abbey, I have a recording of Westminster Abbey at home, which has a little section of it played on the two stops of the 1662 organ, which was built by Father Bernard Smith. In 1662 it was used by Henry Purcell himself. And now, of course, this is one organ that does have 82 speaking stops as well as others. It goes up to about 120 stops. It is an enormous organ, as what you would expect in Westminster Abbey. And way down inside it somewhere, there are two original ranks of pipes that were put in 1662. And they are said to be remarkable for their purity of tone. But unfortunately, their context, their visual and oral context, is completely gone. Where is the whole tonal structure? It's completely gone. It's rather like keeping, I was thinking, what is this like? Well, if you had a nice jumper which had some nice knitted panels down the side here, and so you cut out the knitted panels and threw the jumper away and said, aren't these nice panels? Yeah, what use are they? What can you do with them? Can your ears with them? I don't know. They're totally useless, just to keep little bits of an organ. What will be the evidence of the original organs if they are all changed? Music relies on interpretation, and hence we have wonderful arguments about that sort of thing. And historic performance is in today. We've all heard, I hope, recordings and so forth by Christopher Hogwood and his Academy of Ancient Music, and everything he does, he claims, is being played on authentic instruments or exact replicas, so that he might be able to reproduce the sound that was heard when Bach or whoever wrote this particular piece of music. If you have the authentic instrument, you don't need to even try to reproduce an exact replica. On the other hand, how can you produce an exact replica if you don't have the model to produce it from? You have to make up your mind sort of what it was you think from the documents and whatever else, but it may be quite different in sound. So I have a little problem about exact replicas. Another argument is that a particular organ is not one of the builder's best, and therefore it'll be improved the way that the builder would have done it. This is a very common one. Architects have the same thing. If the architect was here today, this is what he would have done. How do we know what they would have done? We can't think like these people 100 and something years ago. Was the builder satisfied with the organ himself or not? We don't know. Would he have enlarged it in any way? And would he have done it in this particular way? All this is conjecture, and we cannot be sure. The whole thing about this is that whereas with Christopher Hodgwood in his Academy of Ancient Music, he is playing music the way that he thinks it would have been played 200 years ago. But that's okay. He can interpret that till the cows come home, but he is not changing the original music score. But when people fool around with buildings and when people fool around with organs, they are changing the original thing. And they are losing the original evidence in doing this. Okay, let me move on to the action. The action is the connection from the manuals to the pipes. This is where you play here and the pipe way up there goes beep, and you wonder how did it get from there up to there. There are three ways of doing that, and one is a tracker action, and that is that it's all done with levers. You push this and you've got this long lever, and that goes, you push the key down here, it does that, and there's a long thing that pushes up, and that pushes something else along there, and so it all goes. And there's a whole heap of levers, and at the other end it opens up and goes beep, and you hear it. Just think of that next time you see an organist going flat out playing the Fifth Symphony, B-Doors toccata from the Fifth Symphony, going absolutely flat out. There's 1,000 levers going berserk inside the organ trying to keep up with the organist. Absolutely flat out. Indeed, it is quite incredible. But when you have a good tracker organ, it is, I think, the best form of action that you can get because you actually have direct connection with the organ. There's a directness there which I like. Because the other problem is that they wear out. And I saw many years ago a book on Spanish organs, and page after page after page, now these are historic ones, 17th century, 18th century, 19th century, and page after page was saying unplayable, no longer playable. Most of the reason being that the action had all worn out. When you get these things that go up and down all the time, if they wear out, then when you put your finger down here, the movement gets lost halfway up and it never reaches the pipe. So you can do all what you like down here, but nothing will happen at the other end. Nowadays they can make trackers much more accurately and lighter and easier than they could years ago. The next one is what's called tracker pneumatic. You've got an organ which is running on wind, and you've got all that wind. You can actually use the wind to help work the whole system. And they're a bit temperamental, but today, again, it can be done better. There have been some restored which can actually work quite well. And the tracker pneumatic is usually, the pneumatic section used to be made in lead piping. But today they use, dare I say, plastic piping. Doesn't matter. It does work. And the last one is something which came in the early 20th century, and this is electro-pneumatic. Again, there is a pneumatic system, but when you push the key down here, all you do is make a little electric connection, and it goes by wire like a light switch, and at the other end it just switches and the whole thing works. It is extremely light indeed. I find that too light when I play an electric organ now, electric action organ. I'm not talking an electronic organ, I'm talking a pipe organ which has electric action between the keys and the pipes. I find it all gets very sloppy because it doesn't give me enough resistance to the fingers. And there we are. They have the least problems, but there is this loss of direct connection, which is a pity. Tracker action altered to electric pneumatic action, which is a very common thing because the trackers are getting worn out and the organist has to plod along pushing like mad in order to make the thing play. This can mean a loss of subtlety in the speech of the pipes because the organ was actually designed to be worked with a tracker action, and when you've taken that away and put something else, it doesn't work quite the same way. And there can be a loss of character in the sound. And so members of OTA are particularly concerned about this aspect. In fact, I think some people go a bit overboard. To them, this seems to be the major thing about the organ. But it is an important point. The problem, another major problem with originality is the shifting of organs. And ironically, it seems like the small wardrobe-size organs seem to stay where they were put, but it's the huge ones that get built into organ chambers that seem to be shifted and put somewhere else, which seems a bit of an odd one, I think. Even interstate sometimes. This one is in the drawing room of Ripon Lee in Victoria. Ripon Lee is, you must have visited, many of you would have visited Ripon Lee, that magnificent, overdone, ostentatious house in Victoria. And it once had an organ in the drawing room. And in 1903 it was installed by Dodd in the Semaphore Methodist Church. That's what it looked like. Semaphore Uniting Church as it's called now. And you remember I showed you a section of the pipework. Remember that particular detail which I showed you a little while back. You see, there's a hell of a lot more to it. There's all that as well. It's quite a notable, quite a large size. It has 3 manuals. It has 19 speaking stops, 19 sets of pipes all sitting up in there. It's got couplers and the whole thing works by a tracker action. But the whole thing was pulled to bits, brought to Adelaide and rebuilt in the Semaphore Church. And we'll look at the next little business here, which is a little church, a little organ I should say, in Stirling. You'll see that it is possible that this organ, to begin with, came from St Mary's in the castle, from Dover Castle in the United Kingdom. We're not quite sure, but we think. And then it was installed by Dawes in Christchurch Anglican Church, North Adelaide. And then it was enlarged. And then it was installed in 73 in the residence. And then in 77 it was installed in Baptist Church Norwood. And then in 82 it was restored to its original specification by Fincham and Hobday and put in the Congregational Church in Norwood. And then in 97 it went to the Congregational Church in College Park. And then in 1963 it went to the Congregational Church in Stirling. And I hope they've chained it down now to stop it from going anywhere else, because it seems to be tracking all over the place. It's a small organ. It has 1 manual and it's a tracker action. It has 5 speaking stops only, and it has 1 coupler and a pedal. That is the case of a fairly small organ, but even so, you can see that it's rather moved around a bit. And a high percentage of the churches which are listed in the South Australian Gazetteer of pipe organs have had at least 2 organs, and shifting organs in spite of their size is a common occurrence. So I thought to myself, let's have a look at Crayford's, the Church of the Epiphany, and see what goes on up there. So we get this situation. Oh, paper's going everywhere here. Crayford's Church of the Epiphany, which is the one in the middle here, okay, had an organ built in 1903 by Dodd. But then we go somewhere else. We'll start down here at Flinders Street Presbyterian Church with an 1882 Fincham and Hobday, which was rebuilt in 1923. Is that the one? No, I'll start with this one. The 1900 Dodd, which was restored in 1939 by Hill, Norman and Beard, and that came across into this church. This organ went over to Burnside St David's in 1963, and they installed this one in 1961, and it was enlarged by Dodd and Sons and Gunstar. This one has now shifted in 1984 to Victor Harbour, St Joan of Arc Catholic Church. In the meantime, St Paul's Pulteney Street had an 1862 bishop as the first organ. I don't know what became of that. But the 1879 Wolf, which was rebuilt in 1904, comes up in 1896 here. This one of 1882, rebuilt in 23 by Dodd, comes up to replace this one in 1960 and was enlarged by Dodd and Son and Gunstar Organ Works. And this one, they just put in a new organ by Smenger. He's a Victorian organ builder in 1995 about. And this one has gone, well, will be going, it's being worked on at the moment, would you believe, to the Wirrawira Winery. Okay. Well, that's all very well. I mean, it's terrific, isn't it? But you must query this now with the criteria of the relationship to the building, both visually and orally, that I spoke about a bit earlier. I can't believe that the organ builder has revoiced all those organs whenever it was done to make sure that it fitted into the new building when he put it in there. And the other one is this called originality of the action and the registration. You can see that they have been rebuilt, they've been extended, they've been shifted all over the place. So the whole thing is a bit of a problem in this particular case. Shifting buildings is a similar thing. People don't, or rather it is suggested that people don't shift buildings because of their historical siting in the first place. It's common in Queensland But that's Queensland, of course, but then they do build their buildings out of timber, and it's very easy to just cut them off at the ground and pick them up and put them somewhere else. That's easy. Stone and brick buildings in South Australia is not so easy to shift the building, but we have done it several times. But it is generally discouraged. The whole thing here with originality is how far can you go if you are looking for this criterion of originality. Somewhere along the line you have to draw the line and say, this thing has been changed too many times, this thing has been shifted too many times, it cannot be the original instrument. It is a difficult one to cope with. Okay, I just want to look quickly. Cultural significance, this is the importance of the organ to the community and particularly to the church congregations. In the Catholic Church it really sometimes makes little significance because organ music has not played a great deal in the Catholic Church except in France, where the organist seems to extemporise all the way through the service, but that is the French way of doing it. In the Anglican Church it's the choir and the organ that seemed to go along, therefore the congregation listened and there was little or no participation at all. But of course the Methodist and the Nonconformist and the Lutheran traditions, everybody sang with great voice. And the organ is very much a part of the whole thing, and the organ is very much a part of the Cornish festival up at Moonta and Moonta Mimes Church up there. So it can be of considerable cultural significance. Rarity and scarcity, don't put scarcity there, but rarity means that it is a one-off or a two-off thing that was ever built and therefore rather rare. Scarcity means that organs of this particular type are becoming less and less and less each time we lose one, and we do lose them occasionally. The state of repair may not be a problem. You could have an original organ in rather poor condition, but it could be faithfully restored again. To give you the right sounds, there should be enough information left in the organ itself to be able to rebuild that organ again, or to restore that organ to what it used to be. So it may be a good thing. And age is not a criterion on its own. I think the Smenger organ that's gone into the Church of the Epiphany at Crayford will be quite a significant organ in time. I think it is now, but some would not agree with that, I think. You've got the present organ, the Casalant organ in the Elder Conservatorium, which I think is quite a fine instrument as well, in its own particular way. The Festival Theatre organ, I think, needs a bit of a go. I think it's in a terrible building for organ music. In spite of the so-called marvellous acoustics, it's no good for organ music at all, and I've never heard it sound nice yet, but it may in another building. And the new Adelaide Town Hall organ, I think, is a fine organ and will in time be quite notable in South Australia, depending on what they do with it. So I come now to the final bit, which is the politics of the whole thing. In other words, what can OTA do about these historic or notable organs? The significance of organs has been officially recognised in New South Wales and Victoria. There is some legislation, there is some control, but in South Australia we don't have this. The only recognition that we have is the list that has been drawn up by OTA themselves. The two main heritage authorities, and that's the State Heritage Branch, which works under the Heritage Act, and the History Trust of South Australia, the History Trust Act, they have some problems in definition. This is why the subheading of tonight's talk is furniture or fitting, because this is where the whole thing starts to come to a head. The Heritage Act controls for the State Heritage Branch are land-based. They are based on buildings. They say they didn't think of buildings when they were writing it, but they were, because the whole thing looks like buildings. So the whole thing has been based around buildings, and it's administered by planners through the Planning Act. And the last thing the planners want to do is to be able to try and control pipe organs that are suddenly going to be taken away and put somewhere else. They don't like things that move from place to place. The State Heritage Branch will consider a historic organ if the building is significant and on the register, and that the organ is clearly a part of that building. In such case, they would include the organ in the listing as being part of the building. But it cannot be listed on its own, which means that if you don't have a significant building, it doesn't matter how significant the organ is, it can't get a Guernsey, which is a bit unfortunate. The History Trust, on the other hand, has no legislative arrangement for this and prefers to go along a conciliatory approach. It hopes to avoid the clash before it happens. It would would like to get the people together, have guidelines and say, if you're going to do things with organs, come and speak to us first and we'll try and sort the thing out. In the meantime, OTA can only lobby the parties involved when the problems arise. There are, at the moment, several problems, current problems. Keep your eyes on these organs, as I can say. The Adelaide Town Hall, this is the old Adelaide Town Hall organ, which was taken out for this present new one, is currently in storage and awaiting restoration. And it is hoped that perhaps it will go into the Tanunda Soldiers Memorial Hall. Some compromise of either the hall or the organ is expected, because the hall is nowhere near as big as the Adelaide Town Hall, and the organ is actually quite a large instrument. It will not be put back to the largeness it was in the town hall before it was removed. The worst thing that happened to the Adelaide Town Hall organ is that it was rebuilt in 1970, and that was a bit of a disaster altogether. The whole tonal structure was ruined at that time. But it can be restored. We know what the old specification was, and there is a chance of restoring it back again. There is an organ at the moment, the Mackenzie organ in Hindmarsh, All Saints Hindmarsh, which is not being used as a church, so it just sits there at the moment. Not quite sure about this one, but there seems to be a story going around that it's been purchased by the Newland Memorial Uniting Church at Victor Harbour. And if that is so, well then, will it be installed and voiced satisfactorily is the question I'd be asking. Just how much is it going to be changed in its shift to the new building? Apart from that, what do I think? I think that change is part of the history of an organ, because they have been changing organs since the year dot. I don't see why we should stop doing that. But many things have to be taken into account. One of them is the rating of the instrument in the state's collection, and if it is so rare and so special, then one has to query whether this is a good thing or not. Another one is, are the changes necessary? I referred to the organ that's gone into Pilgrim Church. It's an enormous organ. It's made up of two other organs and then has been added to and added to and added to, and some of the stops I think are quite ridiculous, but they are still adding to it. And then I found once when I had to play this organ with a small string quartet, I had to play it as a chamber organ, as a continuo to 17th century music. I found it very difficult because there weren't enough soft stops to be able to do it easily. All these stops, and I couldn't get a sound out of it which was satisfactory. So one wonders about just going on adding stops after stops after stops and making the building, making things so big for a building which isn't all that big anyway. And will the changes enhance or compromise the tonal structure of the organ? That is both the pipe work and the action itself. Will the changes enhance the action as well? Or are we going to lose some of that as well? All these things have to be taken into account. Who is going to make these decisions? As far as the ministers of the church are concerned, they want an instrument that is going to satisfy today's liturgical needs. And this is where the problems arise, because of, and I go back to the beginning, the huge differences that you get between one organ and another. And that's what makes it rather frustrating, but also makes it all very fascinating as well. That's it. Thank you very much.
Oh, several hands going
Several
up.
hands,
Yes.
okay. I'll do my best.
Does an organ need periodic tuning, and also when was the organ first started to be used in the church service?
Okay, organs go way back, that they had organs. In fact, St. Cecilia is the 2nd or 3rd century, somewhere around there, Roman. And the Romans had organs originally. They called them hydraulis because they worked by water. And would you believe Nero actually played the hydraulis rather than the fiddle? He wasn't organised when Rome burned. And if he was, he could have cooked the fire out of the organ. But there you go. Yes, organs have to be tuned regularly. It's amazing because they are so complex. All these things that go on inside them, they are incredible machines. There's no doubt about it. I think I saw one once referred to as an engine. I mean, that's what it's like. It's got thousands of parts. You get the weather that we had the last couple of months, where it suddenly soared up to 42 degrees on Saturday afternoon, and every organist in South Australia is going, oh my God, what's it going to be like tomorrow? When you go along there, some parts of the organ will surely be out of tune. With a bit of luck, when it cools down, it will come back into tune again. But you do have to be constantly, I have the St Olsey's organ tuned about once every 3 months, I think, which is not enough, but it's as much as we can afford. Yes, you do have to keep tuning them. When they first came into the church, I think it goes back to about the 14th century or even earlier than that. They have been around for a long time. There was a time when they dipped out in the English church, and they dipped out, and then you read Thomas Hardy and so forth, he talks about the brass band and everything like that in the church. But eventually the organ came back into the church around the 17th century as a specific thing. But on the continent they were being used in the church. England has rather a different history to the organ than England was, or Britain. When Bach wrote his music, his great preludes and fantasias and fugues and all around, he had magnificent organs to be able to write for. 3, 4 manuals, pedals, stops, the works. At the same time, poor old Handel, that's his fault, he went to England anyway, he had perhaps 2 manuals, full stop, no pedals, very small organs indeed, lovely tone and so forth, but very, very restricted indeed from the side. And it wasn't until really the 19th century that the English organ came into its own and started to become a large instrument that it is today. Now, somebody way down the back.
Yes, I'd just like to say that you've solved the mystery for me tonight. When you mentioned the organ in College Park, the congregation of the church, of course, when I was a child, I was told that it had come out of Windsor Castle, so corrected me on that one.
We're not quite sure.
Dover Castle. And I was staggered that it had been in so many buildings in South Australia.
I'm just amazed when you start looking through the gazetteer just how many, very few churches today have the organ actually starting. It's quite remarkable.
And it was a beautiful instrument.
Oh,
Very
yes.
small, beautiful instrument. People used to comment on it when they were built.
Very right. Right.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
I used to go to the congregation churches in Rowley, and Stirling.
Right.
And I wonder, as some years ago, all those churches in the area were sold, and a new church was built up behind that Rocky station on Sunset Rock, that organ wasn't moved from the old congregational church to the new one.
Yeah. So it's moved again.
Well, I don't know. I just wonder.
No, it's correct. It moved. It is in Sunset Rock.
Thank you.
It's incredible. Yes.
Okay. Perhaps you should call your talk the politics of the organ transplant.
Yes. I was going to use that joke, but I didn't. The first original organ transplants, and they've been going on for 100 years all over the place. You can see the problem with those.
Well, if there are no more questions, yes, there is.
Two
John.
more. Okay, John.
You asked about the pipes. People making organs in South Australia. You mentioned wooden pipes, but the metal pipes, do they import most of those metal pipes?
Now, you see, it's thought that the earliest metal pipes were perhaps made in 1848. I think I mentioned that on the way through. But those organs of Lemke, I think he would have imported his metal pipes there. And they still import metal pipes. I had a stock put in St Olsey's and which had been imported stock. He didn't make them here and there. But they can, and they did. I mean, Dodd made all these pipes. Well, he did import some, but he made metal pipes and wooden pipes as well. Yeah. And it's a very tricky business. Actually, the whole voicing of the organ starts at that point. They're not just straight up pieces of tin. They actually bulge out and come back in again. You know, it's like a sort of oral entasis. The way it bulges out and comes in to make just that little better. But all the thousands of little things that they do with these pipes to make them sound just that little bit better. It's quite a remarkable art. It is.